These are just a few ideas, I suppose, to tease your interest in sleep science. But I've thought for a long time that sleep is a very fertile ground for art-science collaboration. There's lots and lots of things that make it really interesting for this kind of work, because it's a universal experience. So regardless of your training, you have a personal experience of this area. It's also, for that same reason, because it's a universal experience, there is a wonderful richness of mythology and beliefs across time and across different cultures, the way people understand and think about sleep. So there's a whole range of concepts from different eras and different places to bring to this kind of collaboration. There's been a very rapid expansion in scientific knowledge, particularly in the last 50 years. And the thing that is very characteristic of sleep science is that it's always multidisciplinary. People come from lots of different backgrounds. So sleep scientists are already used to trying to work across disciplinary gaps. The disciplinary gap between Sam and I is about as big as you could get, probably. But I think that his discipline is also multidisciplinary, and so we have already some tools for talking to people from other disciplines. And the other thing that's interesting about sleep science is that it's getting very political, which of course is also of interest to artists, because the 24/7 society is causing major problems to our sleep. Our body clock actually programs us to sleep at night. That's not a social convention, it's a biologically programmed pattern. And the 24/7 society is creating problems with that. And so now is a good time to get into art-science collaboration in this field.
Philippa asked me to also define performance design for you all. That's the discipline which I work in. That's what I call my craft. And so you've probably got a good idea of where Philippa works. And through the next sort of 15 or 20 slides, I'll talk about the project we first worked on, which defines a lot of what I do in performance design. But for me, performance design it comes from theatre. It's a theatre practice. But it actually considers performance design, or design itself, as the most important practice there of arranging materials. So I've described it as a holistic design approach. So designing the whole work. So a holistic design approach to the manipulation of materials and bodies. So not just materials, but also bodies in a live performance environment. So live, the liveness is really important. It's a very emergent practice. Before this, people would just design backgrounds for performances or costumes, but now with director designers and performance designers, it's possible to start thinking about the whole work, the movement of the bodies, the script as a design. So it's designing of performance, not design in service of performance. And also, it's very interdisciplinary, like sleep science, and we create works that communicate with audiences through a visual, material, and conceptual framework. So the collaboration between Philippa and I started with a performance project called Sleep Wake. It opened in 2008 in the Wellington's print factory, which is an abandoned warehouse very close to Philippa's laboratory. And then in 2009 we presented this show in the Auckland Festival, the Auckland International Arts Festival in Auckland's Town Hall. What attracted me to work with Philippa and sleep science was this notion I had that sleep was like the opposite of performance. The sleeping body is unaware of the demands that a self-conscious performing body responds to. The sleeping body remains sentient only in the sense that its faculties and consciousness are turned completely inward. On stage, however, performers and actors are superconscious. They extend the role play, the social games that we use in everyday circumstances, and they pretend to be somebody else. So that's that kind of super consciousness. And this is what really attracted me to working with Philippa and with this topic. I was also really interested early on in Jacques Lacan's concept of the mirror stage. For those who don't know this concept, it's the moment he describes where the child emerges from the world, where it perceives everything around it as an extension of its own experience and its own origins. And this way of placing the self at the centre comes from a sort of prenatal state of perception, where the experience of being in the womb persists in the infant psychology. And then when this child goes through the mirror stage, it realises that there are other people in the world. It becomes subject to the external gaze of the other and begins to respond to that gaze, modelling its behaviour and manipulating its own image as self-conscious thought begins to produce survival mechanisms like role-playing, mimicry, posturing, and ultimately performance. So I believe that this mirror stage occurs to us every day when we wake up. As we wake up, we leave that internal universe of sleeping, where all our dreams are constructed for our own benefits, from our own paranoias and anxieties. So as we wake up, we move out of this self-centered space to face the external world, and we also retrace our paths of infancy, just rediscovering the world and our place within it. So this is another thing that I found really interesting in sleep. Sleep-wake begins as a theatrical lecture. You can kind of see it occurring here. It begins as an exposition on the mysteries of sleep, and an exposition of the sleep science that Philippa has just described, using polysomnography on the back wall, projected through a projector much like this.
Actually, this was what I envisaged when I first began talking to Sam. I thought of this as science communication. Having no knowledge of the incredible wealth of things that can be done in theatre and the way that Sam looks at performance, this was sort of where my thinking ended. I thought, what an exciting way to explain what's going on in the brain when people are asleep. We've come a long way.
Yeah. And it'd be nice to talk about science communication tomorrow as well,
yeah.
too, because it's an
It's
important
part of
model.
it, but actually it goes well beyond that.
So, as well as this communication element, it was an aim of the performance to also engineer certain awakenings. So the performance does not just discuss awakening, but produces an awakening in the audience. So as a live and lived experience, the goal of this show was to explore that transition between states, when upon crossing the threshold from sleeping into waking, we become aware, connected and responsible beings in a world of other connected individuals, connected actions and connected events. So the show was set up deliberately at the beginning, very conventionally. The audience enter, they sit down. When they sit down, they can look into this box where the performance occurs. That's a very familiar relationship that we have in theatre. Most theatre shows will use 3 walls, maybe a ceiling and a floor, and we look into it through an invisible 4th wall. And often plays done in a domestic interior like this, with beds or chairs or things like that, in a conventional theatre production. And the actor comes on stage and repeats memorised information. So this very familiar relationship that we have in this show at the beginning. But all this changes when this back wall in the set collapses. And the slide's not going, there we are. And so this back wall here falls down towards the audience. And suddenly this little box becomes a frame. So, and suddenly all the space around it becomes important, becomes relevant. They're not excluded anymore. The lights go up and we see the town hall around the set. The real site, I haven't already said that, and so you can see here when the polysomnography is projected, it's projected back onto the walls of the space, and performance occurs behind and around the set, so the world expands like an awakening. You know, maybe this resembles in a way the shift in thinking that the Lacan's mirror stage infant has. In a way, this theatre space opens like an eyelid. it's also possible to liken the body of the theatre audience as well to the body that sleeps and dreams. So in sleep, the brain does not process environmental inputs. Like in the theatre and cinema, we shut out the world around us and focus on a fictional construct, which is either the play or the dream. Within sleep science, there are specific phenomena that further these poetic connections between the sleeping, dreaming body and the body of the theatre or cinema audience. So I've listed some here. Stimuli are blocked from moving through the brainstem. So this stops the sleeper from moving in their dreams. They stay still. So you're basically paralysed from the neck down. The limbic system is highly activated, generating emotion. Areas of the cerebral cortex that integrate emotional perception are also hyperactivated. And areas responsible for memory, logic, critical judgment, and directed thought are also suppressed. And so I find, and all this helps the dreamers feel, see, and most of all believe their internal dreamscape. But we do the same thing in theatre. We use sound, we use lighting to help emphasize a feeling or an emotion. Also, the audience have this agree to believe what's happening on stage. We call this the suspension of disbelief. And this allows us to believe this fiction in the same way that the suppression of logic and judgment help us believe the dream that we're seeing in front of us. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting relationship here between what is to be discovered in the science of dreaming and what happens in theatre. But I think it goes beyond the theatre, the auditorium as well, and actually relates to the way we interact with many media, cinema, television, the computer, where things happen so far away from us that we don't have the same control. Our bodies are paralysed from the neck down. We look, we listen, but our bodies are still, or maybe one hand for the mouse. Yeah. So we assume a kind of sleeping passiveness with regards to the images and events that we witness in the media, like things happening elsewhere in the world, in floods or war or politics. And so the production starts to bring in images from our shared cultural memory. Images of rising water, the flooded room, and the refugee that lifts their possessions above the water. These are all things that we're worrying about today with global warming and lots of problems in many countries of flooding. And by revisiting these images, they come closer to us on stage. We start to recognize them in our physical experience. And so while these events, these floods and things are very common in places like Bangladesh, Haiti, Nicaragua, Tuvalu and Nigeria, it has only become known in the West through recent events like the flooding in New Orleans or the 2007 floods in Great Britain and Europe. In these moments, issues of poverty, conflict and environmental collapse move from media reportage on televisions to other places to the urgency of an immediate here and now. It's in my space. And there's a lovely quote here from Joseph Campbell about the dreamer who creates the dream at the same time as knowing that they're kind of creating it. So there's hide and seek between creative action and ignorance. And I think that's something that happens especially in the first world countries in the West, where we're producing a lot of problems with pollution and stuff, and only half aware they're happening in a dream-like kind of way, because they happen in media and stuff, they're not in our own space.